Hi everyone and welcome back. In our last episode, we continued our journey on the Oregon Trail across the Great Plains, visiting Scotts Bluff National Historic Site and Chimney Rock. Our Golden Anniversary adventure continues as we leave Nebraska, travel further west into Wyoming past the prairie towns of Mitchell, Morrill, Henry, Torrington, and Lingle to our next destination, the Fort Laramie National Historic Site. From Florida to Alaska, from the East Coast to the West Coast, join Jane and Steve celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, traveling across North America in the Cool Nana Coach, their 27-foot Ford Freedom Elite Class C motorhome, as they visit the many beautiful points of interest in all 50 United States on their Golden Anniversary adventure. It's a gorgeous day with plenty of sunshine and blue skies as we leave Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, and continue westward on the Oregon Trail, US Route 26. Jane and I are getting very excited as we come closer and closer to Montana, where we will cross the border into Canada. Our journey to Alaska is truly getting real.
Turn left on West 4th Street. Continue on US 26.
Our destination today is historic Fort Laramie. The plan is to tour the fort, then stop off at the Oregon Ruts National Historic Site for a brief visit, then on to Casper, Wyoming, where we will spend the night at Camp Walmart before moving on to Montana tomorrow. Once again, we sadly passed through some once thriving prairie towns that have been economically devastated by the COVID epidemic, along with the budget-breaking rise in fuel costs that obviously has reduced tourism to the area.
Arriving at Fort Laramie on the left.
Originally established as a private fur trading post in 1834, Fort Laramie evolved into the largest and best-known military post on the Northern Plains. Located at the confluence of the Laramie and North Platte rivers in southeast Wyoming, this famed outpost, first as a fur trade post, then as a military garrison, played a strategic role in transforming the United States. Here, for 56 years, successive waves of trappers, traders, Native Americans, missionaries, immigrants, soldiers, miners, ranchers, and homesteaders interacted and left their mark on a place that would become famous in the history of the American West, Fort Laramie. Established in 1834 as Fort Williams Trading Post, Indian tribes, especially the Lakota, traded tanned buffalo robes here for a variety of manufactured goods. Fort William enjoyed a near monopoly on the buffalo trade in this region until a competing trading post, Fort Platte, was built a mile away in 1841. This rivalry spurred Williams owners to replace their own aging fort with a larger adobe walled structure, and they named that Fort John. In 1841, the first of many westward-bound emigrants arrived at Fort John. Tens of thousands of immigrants bound for Oregon, California, and the Salt Lake Valley would eventually stop at the fort. The traders at Fort John did a brisk seasonal business catering to the needs of immigrants. Each spring, caravans arrived with trade goods at the fort. In the fall, tons of buffalo hides and other furs were shipped east. Throughout the 1840s, however, the take of buffalo robes continually declined, and Fort John's role changed. A restoration effort of the cavalry barracks structure required excavations in the building's interior and along the west side. Over 5,000 artifacts were recovered that physically documented the changing use of the building through time. The roughly 5,000 artifacts recovered from under the cavalry barracks floor and around the buildings range in date from the 1860s to the mid-20th century. The range of object types is equally diverse. Food, refuse, and animal, bird, and fish bones were found throughout the building. Bits of serving dishes, glasses, and food preparation items were also found. Most of these artifacts could have been used throughout the lifespan of the building's occupation. Other objects, most of the bottles, corks, and other closures, and much of the miscellaneous material date to the period of civilian ownership and reflect the hotel, saloon, dance hall, and ranching activities of this later period. The interpretive display includes historic photographs of the native Northern Plains Indians and their interactions with the U.S. Cavalry, including council gatherings, which at one numbered over 10,000 Indians from the various Plains tribes. These council meetings were held to establish treaties between the tribes and the U.S. government as the migration of immigrants to the West ensued. Sadly, relations that began amicably between Native Americans and the Army began to change as the number of immigrants using the overland trails swelled. Fort Laramie played an important role hosting several treaty negotiations with the Northern Plains Indian nations, the most famous of which were the Horse Creek Treaty of 1851 and the still controversial and contested Treaty of 1868. In 1849, the U.S. Army offered to purchase Fort John as part of a plan to establish a military presence along the emigrant trails. The owners of the fort agreed to the sale, and on June 26, the post was officially renamed Fort Laramie, and it began its tenure as a military post. The Army quickly constructed new buildings for stables, officers, and soldiers' quarters, a bakery, a guardhouse, and a powder magazine to store and support the fort garrison. As conflicts grew, major military campaigns were launched from the fort against the Northern Plains tribes, who fiercely defended their homeland against further encroachment by a nation moving west. As the Indian Wars came to a close, Fort Laramie's importance diminished. The post was abandoned and sold at public auction in 1890. Over the next 48 years, it nearly succumbed to the ravages of time. Preservation of the site was secured, however, in 1938, when Fort Laramie became part of the National Park System. Over the next 48 years, it nearly succumbed to the ravages of time. Preservation of the site was secured, however, in 1938, when Fort Laramie became part of the National Park System. Thank you so much for watching. But before we go, we have one more stop to make. Just a dozen miles further west is a Wyoming State Historic Site known as the Oregon Trail Ruts. In 1830, Bill Sublette turns the first wheels from St. Louis to the Rocky Mountains. Following his faint trail, a decade later and on through to the 1860s, appear straining, twisting teams of oxen, mules, and heavy draft horses drawing Conestoga wagons for Oregon pioneers. The wagon wheels actually cut through solid rock. Trailing the Oregon-bound avant-garde, but otherwise mingling with those immigrants, inspired by religious fervor, loom footsore and trail-worn companies, Mormons, dragging or pushing handcarts as they follow Brigham Young to the valley of the Salt Lake. And after 1849, reacting to a different stimulus, but sharing the same trail, urging draft animals to extremity, straining resources and often failing, hurry gold rushers California bound.